So I want you to try something. Stand in front of a mirror, look right into your own eyes, and then quickly glance from your left eye to your right eye.
It's a trippy experiment.
Yeah, it really is, because if you pay close attention, you will notice something deeply unsettling. You cannot actually see your own eyes move in the reflection.
Right. You literally can't see it.
Your brain is actively blinding you for a fraction of a second. It's editing out the chaotic blur of physical motion and hallucinating this perfectly stable, continuous reality for you to look at.
Which is just a biological glitch, right?
Exactly. But what if that exact same cognitive glitch, the mind's desperate need to edit out the blur and freeze reality into static images, what if that is the fundamental reason our models of quantum mechanics are broken?
It is the ultimate diagnostic nightmare. Because if the instrument you're using to measure reality is secretly editing the data before you even process it,
Before you even know you're looking at it.
right, exactly, then every conclusion you draw from that instrument is, well, it's compromised.
So welcome to today's deep dive. I want to speak directly to you, the listener, today, especially if you're an engineer, a physicist, or just someone with an intensely curious scientific mind.
The people who want to pull things apart.
Yeah, exactly. If you're the kind of person who constantly asks how things work, today we are taking a massive step back to look at the foundational architecture of reality itself. And our focus, the mission for this deep dive, is this. Is physics flawed at its source?
It's a massive question. For centuries, philosophy and science have shared this singular, incredibly ambitious objective
Right.
to decode reality.
Right. We want to know the rules.
We want to understand the mechanics of the universe so that we might predict and influence the world around us. And to achieve this, the scientific enterprise functions like this magnificent intellectual tower.
Building up and up.
Yeah, we're constantly building new models on top of old ones. We rigorously test these frameworks in laboratories and particle accelerators, astronomical observatories, and we discard the weak theories and retain the ones that answer more questions.
The ones that offer sharper predictions grant us greater control over our environment. And, it works to a point.
Oh, absolutely.
We built bridges, we split the atom, we put rovers on Mars. But, and this is the fraction of the foundation we're talking about, instead of wrapping up neatly into some elegant, unified theory of everything, our finest models invariably fracture under pressure.
They always break at the edges.
Yeah. The higher we build this scientific tower, the more the base seems to crack. And we see this brilliantly and, frustratingly, in quantum mechanics.
Well, quantum mechanics is the perfect example.
Because the neat classical lines we drew between the observer and the observed, or between cause and effect, they completely break down at the subatomic level. And what do? We find ourselves inventing increasingly abstract concepts just to keep the current theories from falling apart.
Think about dark matter. We observe the gravitational effects in galaxies. The rotation curves don't match our classical equations of gravity. And instead of assuming our fundamental framework of space and matter is structurally wrong,
we just hallucinate an invisible placeholder.
Exactly. We invent a ghost particle that makes up most of the universe just to balance the mathematical ledger. We invent string theory, adding, 10, 11 dimensions of space that we can never actually observe.
Just to make relativity and quantum mechanics play nicely on a chalkboard.
Right. It's like adding more duct tape to a leaking pipe.
Which brings us to the central, provocative thesis of our deep dive. What if the problem isn't that the math is too hard? What if the problem isn't that our particle accelerators just aren't large enough to smash atoms into small enough pieces?
Right, what it's deeper.
What if the foundational software of human cognition, the prehistoric biological cognitive models that absolutely all of our physics is built upon, is fundamentally corrupted?
That is the premise we are exploring today. We are going to look at how biological survival hacks from the prehistoric savanna evolved to become our objective, unquestioned ontology.
The lens we look through.
Exactly. We'll look at how a second-century philosopher named Nāgārjuna diagnosed the exact structural breaking points of modern physics, thousands of years before the Solvay conferences even existed.
Whoa, that part is so cool.
And finally, we will map out how you can navigate a universe that stubbornly refuses to be broken apart.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the absolute beginning, with the biological glitch. Because the original models of reality, they weren't designed by physicists seeking objective truth in a lab.
Not at all.
They were forged by natural selection for a very specific, very narrow purpose, which was basically just to keep prehistoric primates alive long enough to reproduce.
Precisely. If we want to understand why our physics models fracture, We have to understand the mind that built them. So imagine human cognition evolving in an incredibly dangerous, unforgiving environment.
Like the savannah, tall grass, predators.
Right. To survive, our ancestors' brains had to instantly slice a seamless, unified, incredibly complex universe into neat utilitarian boxes. We evolved to view reality through rigid dualities.
Right, because if I'm a prehistoric human walking through the tall grass, survival is my only metric. If there is a hungry tiger lurking in that grass, I cannot afford to view the world as a seamless, interdependent tapestry of co-arising phenomena.
It'd be lynchy.
Exactly. If I stand there appreciating the profound interconnectedness of the tiger's biology, the wind moving the grass, and my own existence, I'm going to be eaten.
So to survive, your visual cortex and your higher reasoning had to instantly draw a hard, absolute boundary. You had to look at a fluid environment and arbitrarily draw a line right where you decide the tiger ends and the environment begins.
Just instantly isolate the threat.
Yes. This is the neurobiological mechanism known as edge detection. Your brain seeks out contrast, light versus dark, motion versus stillness, and uses that contrast to hallucinate a discrete object separate from its background.
Which is a brilliant survival hack. I mean, it allows the primate to instantly categorize the world. That is a threat. This is safe. I need to run. But the sources we're reviewing make a really vital distinction here.
And it's a huge distinction for physics.
While edge detection is a highly successful tool for not becoming lunch, it is a terrible, fundamentally flawed tool for understanding ultimate reality. We took a spatial survival mechanism, right? A biological shortcut. And we turned it into a grand philosophical ontology.
We basically assumed the universe actually is the way our prehistoric brains divide it.
Which brings us back to the mirror experiment you heard at the start of the show. That phenomenon, saccadic masking, is the perfect physical manifestation of this cognitive glitch.
I want to spend some time on this, actually, because it absolutely blew my mind when I first really dug into it.
It's wild, right? When we look around a room, we feel like our vision is a smooth, continuous pan, like a cinema camera gliding on a track.
But that's a complete illusion. Our eyes actually dart around in rapid, erratic, jerky movements called saccades. They jump from focal point to focal point.
And if your conscious brain actually processed all of that chaotic visual data during the movement, your daily life would be a nauseating, dizzying blur. The sheer volume of sensory information would just overwhelm your nervous system.
So the brain literally shuts off our visual processing during the movement.
It blinds us.
It blinds us for a fraction of a second. It takes isolated, static, high-resolution snapshots of the room when the eye stops, and then stitches those static frames together in post-production. It hallucinates a perfectly smooth video feed.
We are literally editing out the blur of physical motion to create a stable reality.
And here is the conceptual leap we need to make today. This physical editing room is the exact template for our conceptual mind and, by extension, our science. We apply conceptual saccadic masking to the universe itself.
We edit out the connections.
We edit out the seamless, interdependent flux of reality, the blur of constant, infinite change and connection. We mentally freeze the fluid river of existence into solid blocks of ice so we have something firm to stand on.
There's a term for this in the philosophical literature that I think is perfectly brutal. Reification.
Yes, reification.
Right. And it's treated not just as a cognitive error, but as a disease of the mind. Reification basically means taking something that is inherently fluid, abstract, or interconnected, and violently freezing it into a solid, independent, absolute thing. We hallucinate concrete nouns where there is only continuous process.
We live our lives and construct our physics as verbs violently masquerading as nouns.
Now, I know if you're an engineer or a physicist listening to this, you might be screaming at your dashboard right now.
Oh, I'm sure there's some pushback brewing.
Wait, I have to stop you there because I'm experiencing that exact skepticism. If this cognitive glitch, this edge detection and saccadic masking kept our ancestors alive long enough to invent calculus, build cities, map the human genome, split the atom, calling it a disease seems incredibly dramatic.
That sounds harsh, yeah.
Isn't it just a highly successful feature of human evolution? Why is it a problem?
It's a completely fair pushback. And the answer requires us to draw a hard line between conventional functionality and ultimate truth. The disease is not the fact that the tool works for survival. The disease is that we have completely forgotten it is just a tool.
Okay, let's use a medical analogy to visualize this because it helps clarify things. Think about an X-ray machine.
Great analogy.
When you fall off a ladder and break your arm, you want the X-ray to show you that binary certainty. You want to see the clear, jagged white line of the fracture against the dark background.
Edge detection gives you that. It gives you classical Newtonian mechanics.
Right. But what if we are using this X-ray machine to diagnose the fundamental quantum nature of the universe? An X-ray machine is entirely incapable of capturing the quantum wave function or the interconnected relational fields of subatomic particles. We are using a broken instrument designed to hunt mammoths and fix broken bones to diagnose the absolute structure of existence.
Exactly. We mistake the provisional map for the ultimate territory. We operate under the delusion that the absolute boundaries we hallucinate are inherent properties of the cosmos, rather than localized cognitive projections.
We assume reality is actually made of the ice blocks we froze.
And this biological glitch translates directly into the flawed grammatical and structural frameworks of modern science.
Which moves us into understanding exactly how these ice blocks take shape in our science. Because once our brains decide to freeze the river, those blocks take on a very specific, very rigid architecture. We have to talk about the invisible mannequin.
The invisible mannequin. This is a brilliant concept from our sources that perfectly exposes how our language and our physics deceive us. It explains how we fundamentally hallucinate objects.
Right, so imagine you're holding a hot ceramic coffee cup. Think about what you are actually experiencing in that specific moment. From a purely sensory standpoint, you are experiencing a temporary aggregation of properties.
You feel localized heat. You see a visual frequency you interpret as red.
You feel extension in space, a sense of solidity against your skin. It is a highly dynamic relational event happening between your nervous system and the environment.
But our edge-detecting brain panics at the ambiguity of a relational event. It cannot handle the idea that there's just a centerless collection of properties interacting in space. It craves an anchor.
It needs a noun.
Exactly. So the mind invents an invisible mannequin, a foundational core entity that we label the cup. And then we dress this phantom mannequin up in the temporary clothing of those properties.
We literally say the cup is hot or the cup is red. We artificially separate the object from its properties. We assume there is a naked foundational core and essence beneath it all, and we mistake our conceptual label for an inherently existing object.
And this insistence on finding the core entity forces us to project a rigid grammar onto the universe. We demand that the cosmos be written in discrete nouns and verbs, and that grammar traps us in what the texts call the triadic delusion.
The triadic delusion. This is where classical physics gets its entire operating system.
It really is.
Yeah.
The triadic delusion is the realization that our dualistic minds automatically and aggressively divide the continuous flow of reality into rigid triads. We cannot process a unified event, so we arbitrarily slice it into three distinct spheres: subject, relation, and object.
We see this literally everywhere. In causality, we invent a cause, the mechanism of causality, and the effect. In action, we hallucinate an actor, the action itself, and the result.
Even in our own internal consciousness, we split it into the perceiver, that little invisible manager sitting behind your eyes, the active perception, and the perceived world out there.
We impose these artificial, highly simplistic models onto reality, operating under the absolute delusion that the universe is just a collection of independent subjects performing isolated actions upon distinct objects.
The sources use a metaphor that I think perfectly visualizes how we do science. It's the Lego brick fallacy, because this is exactly how classical Newtonian physics operates.
It is the perfect visual. Think about how we intuitively understand the world. We operate under the delusion that the actor, let's say, a driver in a car, is a solid red Lego brick. The action of driving is a blue Lego brick. And the result, arriving in the grocery store, is a yellow Lego brick.
We assume that these three pieces have their own independent, fixed essence.
Right, they're just floating around in the void of the universe, entirely self-contained, and they just happen to snap together temporarily to form an event called going to the store. And once the event is over, they break apart and remain perfectly intact.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the history of physics, the implications are staggering. For centuries, classical physics assumed that particles, forces, and observers were separate Lego bricks.
Newtonian mechanics, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. If we look at Newtonian mechanics, space and time were viewed as an absolute static stage. And on that stage, particles were treated as discrete entities, tiny billiard balls with inherent properties like mass and charge, flying through an objective void, completely independent of the scientists measuring them.
But then the 1920s happened. Quantum mechanics came along and utterly smashed the Lego bricks to pieces. We had the double slit experiment, quantum entanglement, Bell's theorem,
The weird stuff.
the incredibly weird stuff. These discoveries revealed that the boundaries between the observer, the action of measurement, and the observed particle are, at best, convenient fictions. The particle doesn't have an absolute independent state prior to measurement. The electron isn't a tiny red Lego brick waiting to be looked at.
The neat lines between subject and object completely broke down. This is exactly what Einstein and Bohr were arguing about at the Solvay conferences.
Yes.
Einstein was desperately defending the invisible mannequin.
Yes.
His famous quote, "God does not play dice with the universe," and his insistence on hidden variables. That was his edge-detecting brain demanding that the electron must have a discrete, independent reality, a core essence, even when we aren't looking at it. He wanted the universe to be made of Lego bricks.
While Bohr and the Copenhagen interpretation were realizing that the properties of the particle are entirely relational, they don't exist independently of the measurement apparatus. Yet here we are, a century later, still frantically trying to calculate this relational quantum universe using a cognitive operating system designed for Lego bricks.
It's absurd when you think about it.
We are using prehistoric biological software designed to fragment a world that ultimately cannot be fragmented.
We're trying to force a centerless web into a grid. But realizing that our cognitive Lego bricks are flawed is only half the battle. If we know classical physics relies on these isolated bricks, what happens if we actually put one of those bricks under a logical microscope? Can an absolutely independent observer or particle even logically exist?
This is where the story gets wildly fascinating, because a second-century philosopher actually beat modern physicists to this exact question. Thousands of years before we were arguing over wave function collapse, a thinker named Nāgārjuna rigorously stress-tested these conceptual blocks to see if they could actually hold up the universe.
Nāgārjuna's critique is a masterpiece of logical deconstruction. He didn't just casually suggest that things were interconnected like some vague, mystical platitude. He acted as a rigorous diagnostician.
He brought receipts.
He absolutely did. He took these triadic spheres like cause and effect, or observer and observed, and put them through a brutal philosophical gauntlet to see if they could possess independent, inherent essence. In Sanskrit, this inherent essence is called Svabhāva. It's the invisible mannequin. It's the belief that a thing exists by its own power, independent of anything else.
And he tested this using a logical framework called the tetralemma, or the four-cornered logic gate. I want to walk through this slowly and deliberately because this is where the frozen ice blocks of our reality completely melt. Let's take the rigid triad of a cause and an effect, like a fire and the fuel it burns. Or, to make it physics-based, let's look at the interaction between a measuring instrument and an electron. Our edge-detecting brain demands that these are two separate Lego bricks.
So Nāgārjuna applies gate 1 of the tetralemma, absolute independence. He asks, what if the cause and the effect, or the perceiver and the perceived, are entirely, absolutely independent entities?
Right. If they are truly independent, it means they possess their own standalone essence. They require absolutely nothing else to exist. The fire is fire, completely independent of the wood. The electron is an electron, completely independent of the measurement device.
Exactly. But Nāgārjuna points out the fatal flaw in this logic. If two entities are entirely independent, they are hermetically sealed in airtight metaphysical boxes. An absolute inherent fire is purely fire. It doesn't need fuel to sustain it. Furthermore, it can never interact with the fuel, because if the fire interacts with the wood modifies the fire. It changes its temperature, its color, its size, its duration.
And here is the logical trap. If an absolute entity is modified by something outside of itself, it was never absolute or independent to begin with. Its existence is contingent on the thing modifying it.
Precisely. If the perceiver and the perceived particle are absolutely separate, possessing their own inherent Svabhāva, an unbridgeable metaphysical void exists between them. Interaction is physically and logically impossible.
Nothing can touch.
Right. If the measuring device and the electron are truly independent, the device can never affect the electron, and the electron can never register on the device. The gears of the universe freeze. A static, independent universe cannot move, change, or interact. So, gate 1, absolute independence, completely fails.
Okay, so the edge-detecting mind realizes separation implies paralysis, so it panics and swings wildly to the opposite extreme. Gate 2, absolute identity. What if the cause and the effect are the exact same thing? What if the fire and the fuel are absolutely identical?
If the cause and the effect are absolutely identical, the dynamic relational verb separating them collapses entirely into tautological absurdity. The action ceases to exist.
It's like saying the raw ingredients of a cake. The flour, the eggs, the sugar, and the fully baked cake sitting on the counter are exactly the same thing. If they are identical, the action of baking disappears. There is no distance for the verb to cross. If the observer and the observed particle are identical, the action of measurement vanishes. You can't have an interaction if there's only one monolithic thing.
Exactly. Because absolute identity destroys relationship just as thoroughly as absolute separation does. If A and B are the same, there is no causality. So, gate 2 fails.
Now, this is where modern physics often tries to find a loophole. Gate 3, both. What if they are both identical and separate? This sounds a lot like how we try to explain quantum superposition, right? We say, well, the particle is both a wave and a particle. It's both here and there. Schrödinger's cat is both alive and dead until we look at it.
It's a very tempting trap. Our minds, desperate to keep the Lego bricks, try to smash them together into a paradox and call it a profound truth. But Nāgārjuna dismantles gate 3 just as ruthlessly. To say something is both absolutely independent and absolutely identical is a logical pileup.
It's just contradictory.
It's a total contradiction in terms. You cannot possess an inherent standalone essence while simultaneously being identical to the thing you are supposedly independent from. In physics, superposition isn't a permanent inherent state of bothness. It's a mathematical description of probabilities before an interaction forces a relational state.
Right. The wave function collapses into a definite state upon measurement.
Yes. If a system was inherently both at a fundamental absolute level, it would just be a chaotic contradiction. It offers no mechanical explanation for reality. It just hides the flaw behind a paradox.
Right. It's a mathematical band-aid, not an ontology, which leaves the desperate mind with only one final option. Gate 4. Neither. The cause and effect are neither independent nor identical. They are neither separate nor the same.
And Nāgārjuna rejects this as well, primarily because it often leads to pure nihilism or incomprehensible gibberish. If you claim reality is neither, you are essentially claiming a void. You are stripping away all characteristics, which leaves you with a universe where nothing can be said to exist or function at all.
It's an abdication of logic.
Truly. If it's neither, how does the apple fall from the tree? How does a star emit light? Gate 4 provides no mechanism for the reality we actually experience.
So what does this all mean? We've run our cognitive operating system through the four corners of logic. Absolute independence freezes the universe. Absolute identity collapses it. Both is a contradiction. Neither is a void. Every single attempt to define a permanent, independent thing interacting with another thing fails.
It leads to the inescapable conclusion that all these discrete objects, these neat divisions, are empty. This is the core concept of emptiness. They are empty of a permanent, standalone essence. They lack Svabhāva. They do not possess an invisible mannequin.
That insight is just.
Right.
It induces a profound intellectual vertigo because it means every noun we base our science on is a lie.
Yeah.
The self, the particle, the observer, the cause, the effect, the force of gravity, they're all just verbs. They are dynamic processes violently masquerading as nouns.
They are temporary, dependently co-arisen designations imputed by a mind desperate for structure.
Which naturally pushes us into the most important question of this deep dive. Because if reality isn't made of independent Lego bricks snapping together, how does it actually function? If there are no solid nouns, what is the universe actually doing?
If things are empty of independent essence, it means they only exist in total instantaneous co-creation. This is the mechanical truth of dependent origination or mutual co-arising. Boundaries are artificial linguistic projections. The reality is a shifting interdependence where subjects and objects emerge strictly through their relationship to one another.
We have to translate this from philosophy into physics, but I want to start with a relational metaphor from the sources because it shatters the Lego brick delusion so beautifully. Let's look at the relationship between a parent and a child.
It is the ultimate demonstration of mutual co-arising in human terms.
You cannot isolate a parent in a vacuum. You can be an adult human walking around for 30 years with a job, a mortgage, and a car, but the specific, profound identity of a parent does not exist, not even slightly, not potentially, until the exact millisecond the child is born.
The cause and the effect are instantaneously co-created. You don't have a fully formed parent sitting in a waiting room possessing the inherent essence of parenthood, just waiting for the action of parenting to bump into the object of the child.
Right. The parent and the child co-arise simultaneously. They lean against each other like two sheaves of reeds in a field. If you pull one away, if you remove the concept of the child, the entire conceptual structure of the parent collapses because they have no individual absolute foundation.
And this applies directly to observation and measurement in quantum mechanics. We can explore this through the metaphor of the shadow and the light source. We have this deep-seated belief, often called the homunculus theory of mind, that the perceiver sits fully formed in the dark behind our eyes, just waiting for the eyelids to open to view the objective world.
Like a little permanent scientist in my head, clipboard in hand, waiting to look through the microscope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the observer doesn't sit in the dark waiting. The subject is like a shadow. Think about the physics of a shadow. A shadow doesn't exist fully formed in a dark closet, waiting to be let out into the room. The shadow is instantly co-created by the intersection of the light, the object blocking it, and the surface it falls upon.
And it updates in real time. If the light source moves an inch, the shadow instantly contorts. The observer is instantly co-created and updated in real time by the interaction with the observed. This completely reframes the quantum measurement problem.
Absolutely.
Look at Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, which suggests that observing a photon now can seemingly affect its state in the past. It bends our minds because we are thinking in Lego bricks. But if the scientist and the particle do not exist independently prior to the measurement, then they co-create the localized reality of that measurement instantly. There is no pre-existing thing being retroactively changed. The relational event is just occurring across a broader conceptual space-time.
What's fascinating here is how this continuous updating forms a centerless feedback loop. In ancient philosophical frameworks, this is the true mechanical definition of karma.
Oh, not the pop culture version of karma.
Right, not some cosmic behavioral scoreboard where the universe punishes you for being bad, but an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. A continuous loop of cause and effect with no discernible beginning.
The sources use an analogy about a golden retriever to explain this, but I want to map it directly to how a scientist interacts with an experiment. Let's take the dog first. You are walking down the street, and 50 feet away, a golden retriever is walking toward you on a leash. Conventionally, your edge-detecting brain says, there's an independent object, the dog broadcasting dogness, and I am an independent subject observing it.
But let's add the karmic feedback loop. Let's say when you were 5 years old, you were viciously bitten by a dog. That past trauma physically rewired your amygdala. It altered your nervous system. That biological conditioning acts as latent fuel.
So when you see the dog 20 years later, in a fraction of a millisecond, your conditioned mind imputes a massive threat onto the animal. You actively project your past fuel onto the present object.
And here is where the mutual co-arising happens. That visual trigger instantaneously spikes your heart rate to 130 beats per minute. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. You are now a newly updated, biologically terrified self.
The sight of the dog triggers the mind, which generates the terrified self, and the newly terrified self looks at the dog and confirms the threat, updating the cycle again. The boundary between the inside of the mind and the outside world completely collapses.
Apply this to physics. A physicist designs an experiment based on a preconceived classical theory. Let's say they're looking for a discrete particle. Their past condition in the theory builds the instrument, which is the fuel.
Right.
The instrument interacts with the quantum field. Because the instrument is designed to find a discrete particle, it forces a localized measurement. It finds the particle. The physicist then says, aha, particles exist, and updates their theory, which leads them to build an even larger instrument to find smaller particles.
Wow.
The observer, the instrument, and the observed reality are caught in a mutually co-arising feedback loop. We are projecting our cognitive edge detection into our instruments, and the universe is echoing our edge detection back to us.
Which brings us to the ultimate identity crisis. Let's translate the famous ship of Theseus thought experiment directly into physics. We've established that reality is a continuous updating loop of relations. But what does that mean for the noun traveling through space?
The classic ship of Theseus asks, if you replace every plank of wood on a ship over time as it sails when it arrives at port, is it the same ship? Nāgārjuna applies this to all motion and identity.
Let's apply it to a photon traveling across the universe. Let's say a star emits a photon. It travels for 1 billion years. Along the way, it passes massive galaxies. Its trajectory is bent by gravitational lensing. Its wavelength is stretched by the expansion of the universe. It redshifts. It interacts with cosmic dust, altering its polarization. Finally, it hits the retina of an astronomer looking through a telescope on Earth.
The edge-detecting mind wants to say, that photon hitting the eye is the exact same Lego brick that left the star 1 billion years ago.
But is it? The properties are completely different. The wavelength is different. The trajectory is different. The energy state has been relationally modified by millions of gravitational fields. The goer at the origin, the photon leaving the star, has been completely dismantled and reassembled by the journey itself.
It's an entirely new configuration.
Yeah. The photon that hits the retina is a localized relational event co-created by the retina and the universe in that exact microsecond. The photon that left the star never actually arrives.
There is no static noun surviving the journey. A photon is not a thing moving through a void. It is a sequential, centerless flow of karmic updates within a relational field.
This is the true physics of reality. Not Lego bricks snapping together, but a boundless relational web.
But this naturally leads us into a critical juncture. Because if we deconstruct the universe this thoroughly, we risk alienating the very people who have to live and work in it.
Right. This leads perfectly into reconciling the mirage, or what the philosophical texts call the union of the two truths. Because I have to be honest, if I'm an aerospace engineer listening to this, or honestly just a person trying to survive a Tuesday commute, I'm thinking, so what does this all mean? If the physical wall is just an empty, interdependent illusion, if there are no solid nouns, why does it break my nose when I walk into it?
It is the most vital pushback in this entire deep dive. And addressing it saves this framework from falling into dark, unlivable nihilism. The frameworks we are exploring introduce the concept of functional emptiness. You must understand the union of the two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. They do not contradict. They coexist.
You have to balance the precision of the X-ray machine with the fluid reality of the flowing river.
Exactly. Conventionally, at the macroscopic level, classical physics is highly testable, predictable, and incredibly valid. If you sprint face first into a brick wall, the physical laws of kinetic energy, mass, and the pain signals firing in your central nervous system function flawlessly.
My nose breaks, I bleed, and I get a very real, non-illusory medical bill.
The kinetic energy is real. The pain is absolutely real. The illusion is not the pain. The illusion is the absolute independent wallness that your edge-detecting mind superimposes onto a temporary fluid aggregation of atoms, clay, mortar, and atomic forces.
I reify a temporary arrangement of matter into an eternal, solid enemy that just assaulted my face. The suffering comes from believing the wall exists independently from the fire that baked the brick, the mason who laid it, the gravity holding it in place, and the atomic strong forces preventing my face from passing through it.
Our models are functionally effective, but they are ultimately empty of absolute essence. The sources compare reality to an echo in a canyon, which beautifully bridges the gap between conventional function and ultimate emptiness.
I love the echo analogy. Think about it. If you stand on the edge of a canyon and shout, the echo functionally exists in the conventional world. It has a real, measurable impact. It physically vibrates your eardrums. It can trigger an avalanche. It can startle a flock of birds into the air. You can measure its decibel level with an instrument.
But if you hike down into the canyon and try to grab the absolute core of that echo with your bare hands, you catch nothing but empty air. There is no independent entity called echo hiding in the rocks. It's a relational event, a temporary, momentary collision of air density, vocal cord vibration, atmospheric pressure, and rock geometry.
It's a relational nexus, and modern physics is actually arriving at this exact same conclusion. Look at Carlo Rovelli in relational quantum mechanics. He argues that the properties of a quantum system are not absolute, but are only defined relative to a second physical system interacting with it. The universe is just an infinite web of echoes.
And the sources take this relational nexus even further with the metaphor of the hologram, which ties directly into physics concepts like Mach's principle.
Emptiness doesn't mean a blank void. It means infinite, staggering connection. In a true optical hologram, if you drop the holographic plate and it shatters into 100 pieces, every single microscopic shard still contains the entire image of the whole. Reality operates with that same holographic interdependence. Mach's principle suggests that the inertia of any one object is determined by the distribution of all matter in the universe.
Think about a simple cup of coffee sitting on your desk. Your edge-detecting brain draws a box around it and says, that is a single independent noun, a cup of coffee.
But if you look at the relational web, that cup implicitly contains the entire cosmos. To have that specific cup of coffee, you require the rain cycles of the planet. You require the specific soil composition of a mountain in Colombia. You require the physical labor of the farmer, the macroeconomic trade agreements that brought it across the ocean, the massive shipping freighter, the combustion of fossil fuels. And going deeper, you require the gravitational pull of the sun that grew the bean, and the supernova billions of years ago that forged the heavy elements in the ceramic mug.
If you pull on a tiny thread called coffee cup, you realize it is intricately woven into the rest of the universe. The cup is empty of an independent cupness, but it is full of the cosmos.
We see this exact dynamic in massive human constructs, too. Look at a corporation like Apple. Apple has a massive conventional reality. It shapes global markets, it employs millions, it dictates technology trends.
But does Apple have a foundational core? Does it have an invisible mannequin?
No, it has no physical center. Apple isn't the CEO. It isn't the glass ring building in Cupertino. It isn't the millions of iPhones, and it isn't the lines of code in iOS. If you take all those things away, where is Apple? Apple is just a conceptual overlay, an idea placed upon a massive, dynamic, ever-shifting web of legal contracts, economic exchanges, consumer behaviors, and supply chains. It is a powerful, world-shaping verb masquerading as a noun.
Just like the self you fiercely defend every single day.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult practical challenge: acting without acting. The middle way for science. Because if physicists, engineers, and everyday people know that their cognitive operating system is fundamentally flawed, if we know everything is an empty echo and a conceptual overlay, how do we practically operate? How do we avoid just checking out of society entirely?
We must explicitly warn against the trap of nihilism here. Realizing that the world is an interdependent mirage, lacking inherent existence, does not mean apathy. It does not mean you throw away your lab equipment, stop doing science, stop paying your mortgage, or stop caring for your family.
Right. Realizing the river is fluid doesn't mean you just let yourself drown in it.
Exactly. It means dropping the heavy conceptual raft of reification while still engaging fully and fiercely in the world. You use the dualistic categories, cause and effect, subject and object, matter and energy, because they are conventionally necessary for function. But you use them without attachment, knowing their true empty nature.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I think highly relatable for a modern, tech-savvy listener. How do you engage fiercely with something you know isn't absolutely real? The sources use the brilliant metaphor of an immersive simulation, like playing the video game Elden Ring.
It is the perfect parallel for the modern mind navigating the two truths.
Imagine you are sitting on your couch playing Elden Ring. You are fighting a massive, terrifying, incredibly difficult digital dragon. In that moment, your biological responses are entirely real. Your heart rate spikes to 120 beats per minute. Your palms are sweating on the controller. Your pupils dilate. Your nervous system is flooded with adrenaline. You engage fiercely with the conventional rules of the simulation. You dodge. You calculate attack frames. You manage your stamina. You care intensely about the outcome of the battle.
You are fully participating in the conventional matrix of the game.
But T, when your character inevitably misses a dodge and gets incinerated by dragon fire, and the red "you died" text appears on the screen, you do not suffer ultimate existential trauma. You don't call an ambulance for yourself on the couch. You don't experience a profound psychological breakdown.
Why? Because you never lost the ultimate awareness that the dragon, the armor, the fire, and the avatar are co-created illusions made entirely of code, pixels, and a graphics processing unit. You participate in the game, but you do not experience absolute suffering because you never reified the dragon into an absolute eternal reality.
You play the game, but you know it's a game. And we can apply this directly to the physicist in the lab, the engineer building a bridge, and the learner tuning in today. You can fiercely engage with scientific models. You can test theories, publish peer-reviewed papers, secure funding, build suspension bridges, and use classical mechanics to invent incredible new technologies.
You act without acting. You utilize the tools, the mathematical maps, and the dualistic concepts as necessary provisional instruments. But you stop desperately believing that the conceptual code is absolute objective reality. You use the X-ray machine to fix the bone, but you stop insisting the X-ray captures the soul.
And more importantly, you stop suffering when the scientific models inevitably fracture and need to be replaced. When quantum mechanics upends Newtonian physics, or when a new discovery shatters the standard model, you don't experience an existential crisis, because you know they are just maps of a flowing river. You just update the map.
It is a profound intellectual and personal liberation. You are no longer exhausting your energy defending rigid ice blocks against the warmth of reality.
So let's take a breath and briefly recap this incredible, mind-bending descent we've taken today. We started by diagnosing the foundational fracture in our scientific tower. We identified the biological survival glitch, the edge detection and saccadic masking forged on the prehistoric savanna, which forces us into the cognitive disease of reification.
We then mapped how that biological glitch created the triadic delusion and the Lego brick fallacy of classical physics, chopping a seamless, unified reality into artificial triads of subjects, actions, and objects.
We took those classical Lego bricks and ran them through Nāgārjuna's brutal logical stress test, the tetralemma. We proved that absolute independence freezes the universe, absolute identity collapses it, and that inherently existing objects are logically impossible.
Which revealed the true relational physics of reality, mutual co-arising. A universe where observers, instruments, and observed particles update each other in real time, centerless karmic feedback loops, acting as shadows co-created by the light.
And finally, we learned how to navigate this centerless, flowing, holographic echo of functional reality. We learned the middle way for science, acting without acting, fiercely dodging the digital dragon, building the bridge, and running the experiment, while maintaining the ultimate awareness that the boundaries are made of cognitive code.
This raises an important question. It's a concept I want to leave our listeners with today. A final thought to mull over as they drive home, or walk into the lab, or sit down at their desk.
I love a lingering thought that keeps the brain spinning. Let's hear it.
We've established through the physics of the ship of Theseus and the real-time updating of the observer that the self, the invisible mannequin we assume sits behind our eyes, is not a static noun. It is not a permanent Lego brick. It is a fluid process, an echo, continuously dissolving and reforming based on an infinite web of new biological, psychological, and environmental conditions.
We are constantly updating shadows.
So when you go to sleep tonight
Right.
and you lose consciousness, and the alarm clock rings tomorrow morning, vibrating the air, sending sound waves into the ear, and a hand reaches out from under the blankets to turn it off so you can get up and go to the lab or the office or the kitchen, who or what is actually waking up?
Wow. If the goer at the origin never actually survives to be the goer at the destination, the person waking up in that bed is entirely new. They are a newly co-arisen event. That is a beautiful, deeply dizzying thought to end on. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive. Our invitation to you today is to step away from the broken X-ray machine, stop trying to freeze the river, drop the heavy conceptual raft, and finally allow yourself to swim in the boundless, magnificent flow of existence. We'll catch you in the next one.